Thank you. Do we have a third panelist? Nathan, hello, hi, great to meet you. Hi. Hi. Very nice to meet you, please. Oops. Do we have a third panelist? Yes, we do. There we go. Very nice to meet you. Very nice to meet you. Take just a seat at the end. Thanks. Okay, so we have the results from the first poll. They're ready. If you want to put those results up. There they are. Sorry. So we've got, are young employees changing the way companies have to think about LGBT issues? Well, of course, 84% say yes, and 16% say no. That's not really a surprise. Let's look and see what the online poll did. 72% yes and 28% no. 3,000 people took that poll, which is quite a good number. Not such a big, a little bit more in the room thought that this was that young employees are changing the way companies think about staff. So that's the issue that we're going to be exploring right now in the first session. So let me just introduce the three people, the three panelists who are with us. Nathan Law, right next to me, who's a legislative councillor at Hong Kong. Thanks, Nathan. In fact, at 23, the youngest person ever to be elected to the Legislative Council in Hong Kong. Welcome, Nathan. Next to Nathan is Clarice Kan.
Clarice Kan.
Clarice Kan, Regional Associate Compliance Counsel, Asia Pacific for Google, no less.
Yep.
And last but not least, Rica Paras.
Yes.
And Senior Manager of Technology for Accenture and Chairwoman of the Society of Transsexual Women of the Philippines.
Hi. Morning.
So the reason we wanted to start with this panel, particularly this year, was that last year we really took one of the clearest takeaways from last year was that millennials are a driving force for change around LGBT. And we've all read about how Asia's globally connected. Millennials are increasingly accepting LGBT diversity and same-sex marriage as a kind of social norm now. We'll explore whether that's true or not, but that's what we're hearing, and that we're now witnessing a genuine generational shift in attitudes across the region. So let's begin, I think, with a discussion around the millennials themselves. Nathan, are young people more likely to be open to LGBT issues in the region? And what do you think are the causes of that generational shift, if that's indeed the case?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Hello, everyone. I'm Nathan. That is actually a very good question because I born and raised in an age that homosexuality was decriminalized. And well, recently, the homosexuality intimacy is equivalent with the heterosexuality intimacy. So you can see that the progress in Hong Kong is actually developing for the age that I've been raising in Hong Kong. And for now, I think for the younger generation, because we were born in a way that we could have better access to education and better access to liberal thinking. So for me, I have no obstacle in tackling or handling with all the people with different sexuality. And I think it is a healthy phenomenon in Hong Kong because the society is getting more open to all the different people. But the point is that for now, the local legislations of anti-discrimination on different sexualities is still not yet done in Hong Kong. I think that will be a big target or big goal for us, especially for the younger generation in the Legislative Council to achieve that.
So do you think the generational shift has been particularly pronounced in Asia partly as a result of the rapid economic development and social change that's accompanied that development? Do you see it as being, in a sense, more radical and quicker, more pronounced than it is perhaps in Europe at this point?
Well, definitely. In the recent years, especially in Asia, we've got a huge economic growth, and it comes with more access to education and the liberal thinking. And I think that is very important for us because you could observe in Hong Kong or you could observe by data, better access or better education in these places enhances mindset of getting new ideas and getting liberal thinking, and it really encourages people to accept different sides of people in the society. So I think it really helps for the economic growth to really facilitate the more open society.
Clarice, do you share that perspective? Do you think the younger generation in Hong Kong, the millennial generation, is really quite accepting of LGBT issues as well as a number of other social issues? But do you think that's the case, and why do you think it's the case?
I would preface my answer first by saying that I think there are lots of different stereotypes of millennials, and Rica and I were actually talking about that just before this panel. Generally speaking, I would say yes, I do think that the atmosphere in Hong Kong is liberal. But I think there are also issues on hand which are related to perhaps a lack of true understanding of what diversity and inclusion and LGBT rights and LGBT awareness really means, although the tone is generally liberal. Yeah.
So what do you attribute the rapid change to? Is it just that young people are much more better educated and that they're more connected? Or what do you attribute it to?
I think there are a few things here. The first thing is that doesn't necessarily have to do with education. I think it has a lot to do with access to technology, right? So a lot of the millennial group they were born basically with the onset of mass technology being available on our hands, on our phones, just everywhere we go. So I mean, there's that. I think it also has a lot to do with perhaps being influenced by their peers. I think having visible leaders in the community that have liberal viewpoints, particularly on LGBTQ issues, has also made this, change more rapid here. Yeah.
And Rica, in the Philippines, we've heard too that this is clearly a trend in the Philippines, but it's somewhat more nuanced in the Philippines, I feel, isn't it? It's not as straightforward as all young people are getting behind these kinds of issues. Is that right or not?
I think in general, it's very general that because right now we have very fast access with technology, people would get information really fast. So that particularly applies to the young people. And for my case, for example, coming into terms with my sexuality was through technology as well. I was at the part of the late 90s where the boom of the internet. And for example, for my case, at that time, transsexualism, nobody talks about it. There is no information around it. I identified myself as an effeminate gay man at the time. But because of the access of the information, which is really there, I was able to, voila, this is exactly what, describes the experience that I have. And I think in a lot of ways, that is how young people discover their individuality, their sexuality, because of the access to this information through the technology.
We hear a lot about the role of religion in the Philippines and the difficulties that potentially has for LGBT rights and issues. Would you tell us a little bit about what you think that brings to the nuance of the discussion around LGBT, particularly for young people?
Yeah, of course. Religion and politics, by the way, are hard topics, especially for LGBT people. But I think in a lot of ways, we have embraced the modernity of time. We have now the liberty to take that information available to us and own it and basically live with it on how we believe what it is. So I think in a lot of ways, LGBT people or young people in general have taken that stance on what they want to live their life to be. And that's on top of the current political situation you have or the religious background you have. And in a lot of ways, there is no conflict, I would say. People just live with it. Sometimes you set aside some religious, probably dogma that you have. But in a lot of ways, you just move on with life with how you believe it to be.
Nathan, I mean, just want to pick up on that point because you've spoken a little bit about the obstacle of conservatism and the generally very conservative attitudes in Hong Kong around things like LGBT, particularly in the previous generation. We have a Catholic hierarchy in government here that's prevented, I think, movement around LGBT. Quite often it's said that Hong Kong is in many ways more socially conservative than China. How do you see that process unfolding in Hong Kong? How are young people tackling that conservatism that sits here?
Well, I fully agree that internet actually helps a lot because sometimes when we have discrimination, it's based on the lack of understanding with each other. If the flow of information is getting better and better, so people will recognize that, oh, actually the sexuality is not the difference of people, but it's just an option or just a born nature of someone else. So I think it really facilitates the understanding of different people in the society. And in Hong Kong, the problem is, I think, in Hong Kong, on the one hand, we actually have a huge conservative force, whether it is from the religious group or from, there are some groups in the very highly social, high social groups, so they still have a certain bias on that. But on the other hand, we are in a very single-orientated value society. Sometimes we only treasure central values, and sometimes we only treasure the values come from the authoritarian groups. That is also an orthodox Chinese thinking that somehow inherit or somehow block us to have a more inclusive and open society to accept new things. So I think it is very important for us not only to speak up in the public place for us, for legislators, for all those socially respected groups to say that we actually treasure LGBT community and we hope that Hong Kong to be more inclusive and open. And also we have to really to talk with different groups to have communication in order to eliminate or let the misunderstanding to decrease in the society.
Clarice, I'm interested in what you said about stereotyping, and I wonder, stereotyping millennials, I wonder if you could just explain a little bit more about what you mean about that, because it's clear to me that not all millennials are the same, and not all millennials are going to be necessarily free of prejudice and free of bias.
Right, absolutely.
What do you mean by the stereotyping of millennials?
So I could just start off with an example, if I may. So for example, I think there's a general stereotype which is backed up by actually quite a lot of data, that generally speaking, millennials are quite tech savvy, right? So generally speaking. So there have been articles that have called millennials, for example, even digital natives, something like that in Forbes, right? While I would definitely agree that millennials, generally speaking, are tech savvy, it doesn't come hand in hand that millennials actually like tech, or they don't necessarily like social media. And one specific example of this I have is actually one of my colleagues at Google, who's also a millennial, and we actually went on a business trip together very recently when I realized, to my surprise, that she is totally not on social media, and she doesn't even have a smartphone. So in fact, she uses one of those that can only make calls and text, right? So I mean, the key point to bring across here is that while there may be assumptions associated or stereotypes of certain groups of people, may it be millennials or LGBT people or just diversity and inclusion in general, I think the importance is really to try to better understand people, not just as a group necessarily, but maybe as individuals, so you can better understand what they actually need, what their values are, and what's actually important to them, may it be in the workplace or at home.
Okay, well, Rica, let's get to the hub of the issue now. We've talked a little bit about millennials broadly, but let's talk about them in the workplace. How are we seeing these broader societal changes translate into the workplace? Are millennials, as the polling question asked, are young employees changing the way that companies think about LGBT issues?
Well, definitely. It does change because for now, for my case, for example, I joined Accenture because one of the senior leaders who hired me was talking about the inclusion and diversity policy in the company, as well as the big LGBT ally network that we have. And that is, very catchy to me in a way, and that is one of the main reasons why I joined the company. So I think it resonates to a lot of the young people that we have, that they're looking for a more company that has an inclusion policy, and basically that's something that companies would be striving for in terms of the direction and the policies that they have.
So it's very much something that young people are looking for, and perhaps we can discuss in a while how they themselves are actually acting as agents of change. But would you agree, I mean, Google must agree, of course, that at one level, you join Google because it is a place where it's clearly very inclusive.
That is actually a very good question, because 2 days ago when I was preparing for this panel, actually, we had just had a fireside chat at the Google's Hong Kong office, because we had a visitor from our YouTube team from the US office, Stephen Golden, who was previously the head of diversity for Goldman Sachs here in Hong Kong. And he was just talking to me about the panel and asking me if I was excited, and then the question came across, so you surely must have decided to work at Google because of its attitude, right, towards diversity and inclusion and LGBT issues. And I said, actually, Stephen, that's a really good question, because now that you mention it, yes, of course, that's something that I like a lot about Google, but actually it didn't factor into my making the decision, because I guess I've been one of those lucky few where the workplaces I've worked at have all been inclusive. So to me, it's actually a given. I'd be quite surprised to hear that. I mean, obviously, I know that there are some places in the world or in Hong Kong, some companies, some organizations that may be less inclusive, but I'd actually be quite surprised to find myself working in one of them, to be honest. So it wasn't really a factor that I took into consideration. It was kind of a given, because this is what I'm used to, the type of environment I'm used to working in, even at previous companies, and also because the people around me all accept and embrace who I am.
So luckily you're not working for Uber.
Yeah. No comment.
Sorry
No
if there's somebody
comment.
from Uber here, but well, let's come back to this question of how. I mean, it'll be interesting to ask, and I want to come back to it. Interesting to ask you how, in a company that clearly stands for inclusion, the challenges remain necessarily, or the challenges remain probably of continuing to open it up. But let's come back to that in a second. Nathan, I mean, you haven't been in business, have you?
No.
Yeah, you haven't. So, but I mean, it would be interesting to hear what your observations are about what you think young people can do why young people join particular companies and different companies. Indeed, perhaps even also reflect what it's like to be young, a millennial in the Legislative Council, which is a group of older people like myself, and how do you operate in that circumstance to persuade people of the need for change?
Well, definitely, I don't think I am old enough to get involved in different career except my political career. And yes, indeed, but sometimes leading an office in Legislative Council is more or less similar to leading business in certain sector. I'm leading an office 10 to 12 people, and they are all actually post-90s, so they're only all 20-something years old. And I think that is very important to show that you embrace diversity. Because I've been leading with the office, and there are people working with me. They have come out from their closet in the thriving age, and we've been working during the election. And sometimes having an election is looking for target audience and convince them you're trustworthy, and to convince them that your political beliefs are suitable for them. So. The way you portray yourself is very important to convince them that you are able to talk about policy with certain stance. And for me, inclusive and openness is very important for me to show my political stance to all the people in Hong Kong Island. Try to convince them that I'm their representative. So I think for us, human resources is very important. And we embrace different people with different background, as long as they have the good, the ability to perform themselves in my office. So it also shows some nature of a millennium office in my working place.
And how different is the experience of your office of 10 to 12 people to that, say, of your fellow legislators? Do people feel comfortable in those other offices talking about diversity, inclusion, coming out as being gay or bisexual or whatever? Is there a, do you notice a difference between the way your office runs and the office of others?
Well, rather, I don't think that's, in terms of politics, I don't think that is a matter of age, because for us, we're in a pro-democracy camp, and democracy always comes with a set of values, inclusiveness, and respect diversity, and respect the others. So this set of values comes with our political stance. So even though I'm with the pro-democracy camp, in different age, or sometimes they are far much older than I, they still respect these values. They still respect the LGBT community and support the legislation of the anti-discrimination in the relevant issues. But for the more conservative side, even though they have some 30s legislators, they are very conservative on this sense. So I think the stance comes with their political ground instead of the age.
Rica, let's dig back into this question. You talked a little bit about the way in which open companies attract young people because they are open and inclusive. What is it that, how exactly though, let's flip that and just ask the question, how do young people in fact drive change around LGBT issues? Is that something that you're seeing happening in some of these companies?
Yes, definitely. These young people bring a different culture in the company. So for example, in Accenture, we have what we call the workplace of the future, where we study the different trades and how companies move to the digital future. And in that way, young people change how the company change their policies. Like for example, young people, we see more and more, they wanted to have a focus of me, the me kind of experience. And in that way, companies should provide them this opportunity to have a more diverse and more varied options within the company in terms of the talents and their career progression. So that's how, for example, young people would drive different policies in the company. So on top of...
Could you give us an example of that? I mean, how are young people driving some of those policies you talk about?
Yes, for example, let's see, for example, the way we do training, for example. Young people would have, for example, an experience of a smaller team. That's how we see it. They wanted to have an experience of a smaller team. They wanted to reimagine the learning experience. So it's not the typical classroom training that we provide to these people. It's a different kind of reimagination kind of experience. In that way, the way we run and we train these people, the way we provide the different trainings for them changes in the company. And that's only for their learning part. The other part, as we talk, is the inclusion and diversity. We want to provide an environment where these people can thrive and be themselves. And in that way, we are providing this environment where we can overall together achieve some business goals that we have in the company.
I mean, that's obviously you're working with Accenture. It's a foreign company. It's got a lot of these processes and policies in place. Do you see similar kinds of trends in domestic Philippine companies? Is that something you can identify, or is it just not happening? And are young people driving that change?
Yeah, to be honest, no. But I really do believe that multinational companies with a global inclusion and diversity policies can help influence local companies to embrace that, because the policies of the global companies would be like a business case or a test case for local companies to see that, hey guys, these things are working for us. It's not just for the other countries where we operate in, but for the country where we operate in. And that's only for the local companies, but as well as the government to see that, these companies already have these policies and it's been working well for them, it's effective, it's making their employees happier and more productive. And in that sense, legislations in the government can help embrace that. So because it's already there. And I think it's very important for multinational companies, global companies, to set an example to
so
influence
domestic companies
them.
are having to compete with global companies, obviously, in the Philippines. So at some
Definitely.
point, they're going to have to look at some of the talent acquisition and recruitment and retention strategies that global companies have to.
Yes, definitely. We see more and more attractiveness in the global companies with those kinds of policies.
Clarice, can I just come back, and I'm going to throw it out to the floor in a second, so do prepare thoughts and questions. I just want to come back to this question of Google, a company that we all regard as being, inclusive. It's started by millennials. We've got a lot of millennials working for it. What kind of challenges do you face around diversity and inclusion in Google? And, how aware are young people in Google of those challenges, and how proactive are they in engaging Google on those challenges? What are the challenges? Are the challenges? What are the challenges, and how are you engaging?
What challenges? No.
Exactly. Of course.
I think the challenge is that diversity and inclusion is an ongoing dialogue, right? So even if you have, let me just take a step back. So Google is great in the sense that we have policies that advocate for guarantee equal treatment, right, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, and things like that. So we have structures and stuff like that in place. But I think the important thing to bear in mind is that D&I, like everything else in the world, is constantly changing. And policies and teams and people, and in fact, products, the products from our company and other companies also need to bear this in mind as we adapt to these changes. So one example I can actually give, which is more from a product end, I guess, is a machine learning and artificial intelligence example. So, for example, imagine you automate your recruiting process at a company, right, using machine learning and AI. And you feed the algorithm CVs of people that you've hired in the past who have had really good track records. And somehow the algorithm picks up a link between, just hypothetically, strong sales performers, okay, let's focus on sales, strong sales performers and the type of major they did in college. Let's just say it was finance, right? But then the danger of something like that would be then you're actually undeliberately, but definitely excluding all other people that don't fall within this bucket, right? And that statistic correlation might not be, it might not be causation, right? It could just be a correlation because of some data that you fed the algorithm. And the issue with that type of stuff, I think, is to remember that tech also has a really critical role to play, as all of us. I mean, with things like AI and machine learning, it's based on the data that we feed them, right? And it's also based on human interpretation and interaction with the data that comes out of it.
So you're saying that algorithm potentially introduces biases or selective...
Yes, that's right.
Yep.
That's right.
There could be potentially a problem for minority groups in Google. No.
It could potentially be a problem for minority groups everywhere, I would say.
Good Lord.
Yep.
A criticism of its own algorithms here. Be careful.
But look, tech can also fix the problem, right? You can actually
yeah.
rejig the algorithm to make it remove those biases. But that's a different conversation.
Yeah, it is. But specifically, I mean, without the tech side of it, are there challenges at Google that around LGBT issues that you think need to be addressed at Google?
I don't think there are specific LGBT issues. I think it would be more on the line of, like I mentioned earlier, an ongoing dialogue about diversity and inclusion. Because as we grow, right, we also have different types of people coming in, LGBT, different ethnic minorities, whatever else. So it's really not so much LGBT focused, I would say, the general D&I picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me throw it out to the audience, because I think there's lots of food for thought here. Any observations, thoughts, additions to the discussion here, or questions indeed for the panelists? Don't be shy. First question of the day. Just raise this one.
Oh.
One down here. If you could just say you're Michael. I know from the Economist Intelligence Unit. Michael.
Economist Intelligence Unit, indeed. I have a question for Nathan. I'm curious about, in a Hong Kong context, there seems to be a disconnect between the expat or sort of expat-focused English-speaking community and the Cantonese local community. How can that divide be bridged, particularly with regard to the LGBT issue? Thanks.
Well, that is a good question, and I think it is a result of the past governance of Hong Kong, because before 1997, it is British colonial, and they have been emphasizing on like spreading all these two groups who speak in different language and try to govern themselves by different people. So I think that is part of our history. But for these days, I observe that there are rapid change on that, especially for LGBT community, because I see a lot of events. For example, for Big Love, they organize events that really blend people in, and I've been attending several of them. And people with different background and using different languages, they could really communicate to each other. And for our society, we've got better education. The language skills is also a barrier of that, but I could see that for a younger generation, they really tried to break that bridge and to build that bridge and to break the barriers and try to communicate with each other. So I think in terms of LGBT community, it is very important for our activism to be inclusive and organize events for different people to attend and be able to be bilingual and to offer chances to like people living in different bubbles to talk with each other.
Let me just come to a question here from Twitter. What's sexual orientation got to do with the workplace? Rica, can I ask you to reflect on that?
Wow. Yes, definitely. And I may expand it to the discussion around sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. It's very important to talk about that in the workplace because it signals that we're trying to understand LGBT people. That is why, for example, it's very important to have education and awareness, not just for the LGBT community. And mind you, within the LGBT community, we have to be on the same page on what is sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression to understand the different LGBT and even the queer genders and the intersex groups. But more than that, we have to educate people outside the LGBT community, which we call the allies, and to educate them on what to do. And in terms of understanding the sexual orientation component of it, that it is about who you like, who are you attracted to. And that is not how you present yourself in public. That is not your gender identity, which is another discussion. So it's very important to talk about this, to understand people, to be able to handle LGBT people in the way that you understand them and not conflate everybody in a single concept, in a single mind view that who you like defines everything else that you do. Yeah.
Clarice, can I ask you to give that question a go? What's sexual orientation got to do with the workplace? Should it really be part of what we do at work? Should it be of interest to us at work?
It should definitely be not necessarily part of what we do at work, but like, that might have come out a bit wrong. Sorry, but on a serious note, I think it's really important because it's about being able to bring your whole self to work, right? I mean, it's the same. If you take sexual orientation as, for example, part of your identity, right? Would you bring the fact that you're a mother to work? Is that important to the workplace? No one asked that, for example, right? But then why is there such a focus on the sexual orientation part of it as if it is an issue? I mean, to me, right, it would be, if we want to achieve true diversity and inclusion, that question would be a non-issue. We would be normalizing things like that. It would actually be, there would be understanding, there would be embracing, right? Then there would also be calibrating between differences. But in the end, it's about normalizing things for the LGBT community and things like sexual orientation or other types of D&I, right? But normalizing it into parts of our daily lives, into society, and yes, also into the workplace.
I mean, somebody mentioned to me earlier that heterosexual identities, heterosexual orientation was an actual part of our working environment. There were lots of assumptions around heterosexual activities at work, so why wouldn't there be assumptions around other sexualities as well and sexual identities as well? Nathan, your thoughts. Should we bring, our sexual orientation to work?
Well, definitely for me, my work is to really scrutinize the government and see whether all the stakeholders, the interests, especially for the people I represent, to be considered when the government is making policy. There's no doubt to say that our homosexual community or heterosexual community, especially for the homosexuality, because sometimes when we are making policy, they are being omitted. For example, if we want to encourage the people to be inclusive to the LGBT community, then we may have certain decision in certain policy. For example, we are talking about a policy that you could, in Hong Kong, in Chinese tradition, when one of your relatives died and they will be burned to ash, their body. And for the current version of our legislation on getting back those ashes, actually for homosexual partners, they couldn't do it. It is a thing that shows that in the culture or in the old conservative thinking, the homosexual couple, they are not considered as in positive intimacy in our culture. And for now, we're discussing on a renewal of the legislation, and we provide an idea of blending like homosexual partners could get back those ashes. This idea to really help the atmosphere or the culture of the society, to let them to really take serious consideration of these sides.
Just, we've got time for one more question, I think. Down here, please. If you could just say your name and organization. If you could get a microphone down here, please. Just down in the front table.
Hi, my name is Gordon. I'm representing Konica Minolta in Japan. And actually, I have a challenging question for, I don't want to pick on Clarice, but so just in our conversation, we're talking about products and what happens when we have issues regarding products. And actually right now, hashtag YouTube is over party is trending because the restricted mode on Google's, on YouTube's filter is removing LGBTQ content. And so that's trending, that's an issue. So I don't want to ask you to solve that issue per se, but what kind of conversations do we need, particularly in this case, amongst millennials, to help to create a more positive image regarding this issue, for example, or just issues in general regarding these kind of, I guess, product-based issues or imaging issues?
Right, so I think there are two parts to this, right? I know we're running out of time, so I'll try to make it.
We have to be reasonably brief.
I'll be very brief. So firstly, that was definitely not YouTube or Google's intent. We've also been having very serious internal conversations about this issue, so rest assured that we are definitely addressing it. YouTube has a huge user base of millennials, right? So that's definitely something that is important to us, and it's also a very inclusive company. And to be very honest, this is the type of stuff that I was referring to when I made my machine learning example. And I mean, we can talk about it more separately after that, but I guess just in the interest of time, what I would say to answer the second part of your question about millennials is that I think millennials just need to, well, one, speak up, stand up for what they believe in, right? May it be at work or just personally with their friends and whatnot. And two, also use their tech savviness, right, to help produce better products that would avoid this type of issue in the future and going forward. Thank you for the question.
Well, there were many, many questions that were left unsaid and unanswered, but do please thank our three panelists, Nathan, Clarice, and Rica. They'll be around in the break, so do talk to them then if you have further questions, but thank you very much indeed, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. We're going to move straight on.